Prova. Prova, prova. Prova, prova.
Hey everyone, good whatever time of day it is to you. We'll wait a couple minutes for quorum to get started. I see a couple of folks whose names I recognize from the reproducible builds world on the call. So I wanted to extend an offer and say, if you want to grab space on the agenda, we would love to hear about you. But if you're just here to observe, that's totally fine as well. Is the agenda accessible to you all? I can drop it in the chat. It should be on the calendar invite on the OpenSSF Google Calendar.
I'll have a look. Can you hear me okay, Jack?
I can hear you.
And yes, I can access the agenda also. I believe, no, it's the previous notes, sorry. The agenda.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Great, excellent. Hello, I'm Holger. Hi.
Hi. Yes, you're right, Zach. There's a bunch of us. We saw there was a meeting and we decided that you would, I guess, gate crash and see what's going on. To see what's going on in this world.
Excellent. Lovely to have you. You are extremely invited if you want to just give a spiel. I think there's a lot of overlap in the interests of this group and the folks who usually show up to this meeting. So we can reserve time for that at the end. I'll start. And again, we're not started yet. We're gonna wait a little bit for quorum, but we can start with introductions as a teaser, and then if there's time at the end of the meeting, you want to pitch again the project generally. I think folks would be interested in hearing that. For context, if this is your first meeting, hopefully some of this is evident from the group charter, but this is the OpenSSF Securing Software Repositories group. It's a place where we try to get together a bunch of folks who are involved in, administering, running, writing new package repositories, maintaining existing ones in the code bases for those, and are interested in doing so in a secure way. So we cover a bunch of things. We cover my pet favorite topic is cryptographic signing of packages, but that's closely related to package provenance, how to build packages correctly. Can we do reproducible build tricks to make sure that the packages that are we're being handed, we're pretty confident we're built from source. All that sort of stuff. We typically have attendees from both just interested parties and attendees who administer package managers. We often have representation from PyPI, although I think it's maybe a little too early for him. Ruby gems, NPM occasionally, occasionally Cargo folks swing in. I've seen folks from Gentoo, PHP. So it's a fun crowd. It's a big challenge, as I'm sure you know, and especially retrofitting a lot of the reproducible build folks in particular, I'm sure know about the challenges of retrofitting a good security idea onto systems that were utterly unintended for them, and the wailing and gnashing of teeth that accompanies that. So we hear a lot about that. But like other things that are in scope include like just multi-factor authentication, policies for taking down malware, policies for yanking packages. Think about your left pad incident. All of the above, concerns about user privacy, obviously figure into all of this. So we're almost 5 past the hour. I guess it's going to be slightly lightly attended just because we're really early into the new year. So I'm happy to get us going. I'll drop the agenda once more into the chat. All right, and then feel free to pop in, add your name to the agenda attendee list if you would like. Nice to keep track of who's showing up. And then, yeah, agenda is still open to add items to it. So I'll start with the introduction item on the agenda. So I did a little bit of this in the moments before introducing this meeting, but welcome everyone to the first 2023 OpenSSF Securing Software Repositories meeting. We have a few interesting items on the agenda. Yeah, and I would like to open the floor to anyone who's new to this meeting to just say a quick hi, what brought you here today? Not mandatory.
Well, I'll say hi. I mean, and also to essentially introduce Holger and Mattia. So I'm Chris. Oh, I can recognize more people here. Oh, hey, Lucas. Yeah, so we are all from Reproducible Builds, and we saw that there was a meeting that was relevant and within our time zone. I think I'd seen it before. Excuse me. Seen it before, and it was in a different time zone, or it was a different time at the time, and I didn't realize that it rotated, etc., etc. And I've been pretty lax about attending this kind of thing. So for anyone who doesn't already know, Reproducible Builds started in its modern incarnation, started as a sort of very mild interest within the Debian project. So I mention that particularly because, in other words, a lot of our perspective and focus has been on distribution concerns. I mean, as in terms of like the packages within a distribution and the source and binaries of distribution, not necessarily what is now considered under the rubric of a package repository, which is like the other ones, the PyPis, the NPMs of this world. And we'd like to bridge that gap, because clearly Reproducible Builds affects not only just distributions, that's just where we happen to have our personal histories, all three of us. But like, yeah, we'd be obviously very interested in getting NPM and all of these, and Maven, but all of them. Assume I mentioned all of them. Other repos are available. But yeah, I'm Chris. I live in Cambridge in the UK. And I'm sure Holger and Mattia would love to say hello. But that's basically us. And we don't have anything to add to the agenda. We just thought we'd lurk. And so, yeah, nice to meet you all. So Holger, if you want to say hi, and Mattia, I don't know. No pressure.
Yeah, I'm happy to say hi. I'm Mattia. I live in Milan, Italy. And yeah, as Chris says, we are just here to basically observe you and join you and see if we can be helpful, maybe. And that's it. Yes. Thank you for allowing us to be here.
Yeah, our pleasure. We're excited to have you all. Oh, Holger, I think you're on mute. Maybe not on Zoom, but somewhere else on your computer.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
No, not. No, sorry. It was working a moment before.
Yeah, that.
No, keep trying. I will take a moment to say that I think distribution package managers are definitely in scope for this meeting. I think our charter makes that clear. It's sort of an accident of history that we haven't had more representation from distro folks, but would love to see more of them. And in fact, if you want to tell your friends, I think you know, network-wise, the language ecosystem package repository folks just know each other more closely than we know any folks from the distribution and the things. All right. Let's see. Okay, you're back, Holger, but I'm sorry, cannot hear you. Perhaps if you want to mess around with your settings, we can go ahead and move on with the meeting. And if at any point you make a breakthrough, just holler and you can say hi. All right. First item that I hear on the agenda is Joshua Locke to talk about RSTuff. So I think you probably want to give a fair bit of context for this item.
Okay. Well, I have some slides because then you can look at them and not me. And then I can make sure I don't forget anything. So so Cairo, who's here as well on the call, presented this project sometime in calendar Q4 of last year. But we have this project we've been working on at VMware called RSTUF, Repository Service for TUF. And effectively, we're trying to make it easier to adopt TUF and integrate it into kind of package repositories.
What's tough?
Okay, yes, fair question. So TUF is the update framework, which is like a, and there are other folks on the call who are way more expert in this than I am, but the update framework is effectively a specification for how to perform secure software updates or content updates that mitigate several kind of known attacks on package repositories and the communication between a package repository and the client. And we've had this Python enhancement proposal, PEP 458, for a very long time about integrating TUF into PyPI. And we've had William Woodruff at Trail of Bits did a preliminary pull request to integrate this. I think it was last year, and this ended up being like a huge and relatively deep change to the PyPI code base. And so getting folks to review it and helping those folks develop the appropriate level of context was something of a challenge. Then about 6 months ago, Cairo joined VMware and started looking at this and updating the patch set that William had originally authored to work on changes to the upstream Python TUF library. And while he was doing this work and thinking about how deep of a change this was and how complex it was to review, he started this project called RStuff, which is, as I said in the first bullet, it's designed to make TUF adoption easier. So it minimizes the kind of the scope of an integration task and reduces the complexity of implementing that significantly by providing a service that does all of the TUF pieces for you and provides kind of a HTTP API for integration, rather than having to, in some cases, implement a native library and then integrate that and code up a lot of the repository logic. And so to address the repository logic piece, the goal of the RStuff project is to implement common patterns for adopting the TUF framework. So today we're focused on this PEP 458 design that I already mentioned. There's also another Python enhancement proposal, PEP 480, which moves to adding individual developer signing, and the plan is for RStuff to grow features to support that pattern as well. And who knows what the future will bring. But really what we believe as we've developed this project is that there's a lot of problems around integrating TUF into large complex software repositories, and if we can solve as many of those problems once in RStuff, then that makes TUF adoption easier and better for folks that are interested in performing secure software updates. So the reason I'm here to talk about it is not all of that context, although that context is useful. What I really want to do is move RStuff to a neutral foundation. Today, the code is all hosted in VMware's GitHub organization, but short of paying engineers to work on it, there's nothing VMware specific about this project at all. And given that members of this working group are effectively the primary audience for the project, this seems like a reasonable place to come and pitch and seek support for moving this within the OpenSSF. So yeah, that's yeah, and as Chris rightly pointed out in chat, PEP 458 is nearly a decade old. We'd love to get this finished within a decade. And I think this project is a good way to help make that happen. But anyway, that's just my opinion.
Awesome. Thanks, Joshua. Before we get into anything like decisions or are people in favor of this, I want to take a moment to just ask for questions. Is the context clear? Is there anything we can elaborate on? And I think the ask is pretty clear. So, but do folks kind of get what RSTuff is, what it's doing, why it could be of interest to folks in this group?
I have a small question. I mean, I did joke about the age, but I'd be interested in what you think the chief reason for that. I'll call it delay. I don't mean that negatively, but I'm just interested in the time.
Yeah,
that probably speaks to the effectiveness of moving it. Essentially, see what I mean. So,
yep.
Clarity great.
So PEP 458 was only approved so work started on the PEP like almost 10 years ago, and it was only approved, I say only, I think it was approved around 2 years ago, and the challenge in getting, one of the challenges in getting it approved was expertise to review the PEP. It talks about it assumes a certain familiarity with Tough. It's talking about software supply chain security attacks, which until a couple of years ago, not that many people were aware of or interested in. And the bar to reviewing the PEP and being able to constructively review the PEP was quite high. So we did a bunch of work to lower that bar in collaboration with reviewers in the Python community. And then when the PEP was approved, we set to working on it. While we were doing that work, we had this Python implementation of Tough that had been developed alongside the spec. And there were some performance and API interaction traps in that code base that we discovered while we were trying to implement this integration. So a few folks went off and rewrote this library from scratch, got it security audited, and then we came back to finish the integration work. And it's at that point that the story I told today started, where Cairo came along, started doing that integration work, and realized that PyPI is a reasonably large code base. It's a reasonably complex service. It's operated by a terrifyingly small team. So large invasive changes are scary. So how can we make the change less large and less scary? That's like a TLDR of 10 years of activity, but hopefully that provides some reasonable color.
Yeah, I just want to add two quick notes of color. If I recall correctly, there actually is a PR that someone wrote against Warehouse, which is the implementation of PyPI.
Yeah.
And the PyPI team was uncomfortable reviewing it due to, as you mentioned, the invasive nature of the change. So not just a theoretical concern, but someone had actually tried this out, and it's been lingering because no one feels comfortable saying, yes, this looks secure to me. And it's tightly coupled to a lot of the rest of Warehouse, which leads me, I guess, to my second point, which is this, just that architecturally, it's quite nice to be able to have a confined interface for the security part of the system. So we can do a security review of a self-contained box, and then say, as long as you're using it per these instructions, then what you're doing with it should be safe. So I think there's a nice, there's a couple benefits of structuring things these ways. Any other sort of, I guess, questions about the goals here or the general shape of the project?
Yes, I have a quick one. One piece of feedback I would have is that as another small team trying to maintain a production service, we are unlikely to take a whole dependency lock, stock, and barrel if it that implements core logic that we care about. It's possible, but not a good assumption. So the documentation about why you made these decisions, where you ended up, why other people have had difficulty in the past is much more valuable to me than the code base I'm likely to choose to re-implement in my own language.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point, and we can definitely take that recommendation. The other point that I did, I may have glossed over a bit, but I think it's useful to have like a for want of a better term, a reference implementation, right? And the more isolated from the particular repository that we can make that, the more useful that is to people who just like, do you want to have to read all of PyPI to figure out how to implement stuff in your thing, or do you want to just be able to look at a much more consolidated implementation?
I think this is a great project. I know that I have looked at Tough for 3 to 5 years now, and it's made no sense to me. And then after having tried that, I went back and reread a PR someone made to add Tough to the ecosystem I work on. And, you know, the 10th time I read it, it's like, oh, this actually makes sense. I disagree with almost every decision in this outside contributors implementation, but I understand what the point is. And so I wonder if that could be short-circuited by taking those documentation about how it worked for Python and trying to generalize it and trying to give different perspectives so that hopefully it clicks for more people.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good feedback.
Awesome. Then I will echo what everyone says, that in general it's tricky to get a grasp on Tough. This is certainly something I know I've seen a few faces on the call who are sort of core to that team, and this is something that they're aware of and struggling with. You know, it's hard to know. I think a bunch of this complexity is inherent to the problem domain. There's a number of like quite subtle attacks that Tough is trying to deal with, but hopefully over time we kind of improve the tooling and improve the ability to adopt. So I guess with that said, as a I guess point of process, the charter of this group gives us quite limited decision-making power. So I don't believe that like we can in this group unilaterally decide this is going to be something we adopt as an open SSF project. But I think what we could do is take I guess a straw poll of the room. You're shocked, yeah.
Yeah, sorry I'm late. I would, I guess, refine that. It was more that this group doesn't have any sort of governing or binding power on the repositories, which I guess makes it difficult for us to position ourselves as blessing something, but I wouldn't say that it makes it impossible to split the hairs.
Do you think, Jacques, that it would be reasonable for us to do something like take a non-binding vote that says whether folks in this group think this is a good idea, would be willing to do the maintenance, et cetera, and then present that to a body with the actual authority to adopt a project? Oh,
I'm sorry, I'm thinking. I haven't frozen.
okay.
Yeah. I should also confess that I didn't have coffee yet. So I'm basically a talking vegetable. Yeah,
Zach,
the maintenance burden is one thing I think about is right, like is like we can sort of like anoint it or say that we like it, but there's nobody onto whom the responsibility will automatically devolve. I see that you have a hand up, Joshua. Is there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, mostly that, like, I recognize the maintenance burden. We're not asking to donate this project and walk away. We're asking to continue to work on it just within a different organization that better conveys the neutral, the neutrality of the project, and hopefully makes it easier for potential users to find.
I would be comfortable with that. Like if it's not a ditch and run sort of operation, which sometimes happens. I'm sorry,
yeah,
to cut you off.
I apologize. I maybe should have articulated that better. I mean, I think Cairo would come and find me if I asked him to stop working on it anyway, but yeah, we have no intention of stopping working on this anytime soon.
I would be in favor of a vote saying whether I mean, ultimately sort of like adoption as a thing belongs to TAC. So really what we would be doing is recommending to TAC whether we put the OpenSSF sticker on it. I would be fine with the vote at straw poll at least. And that's all I got, Randall, I promise.
Cool. Yeah. So Randall, I think I saw your hand if you want to.
Yeah, I got a call. I'll come back in a second. I can give you some insight how we did it on SKF, but yeah, you need to have a working group sponsor it, and then you present it to the TAC as like something you want to do. But I will say that the TAC is kind of backed up right now, so you might not really get an answer back till March, maybe. So yeah, just so, for the record.
All right, awesome. Well then, it sounds to me like taking a vote on whether this group wants to recommend this to the TAC, and then I suppose I can follow up and present that to them if it passes is reasonable.
The official terminology they like is that we would like to sponsor this project as part of our working group. That's kind of how they like to phrase it.
Awesome. Appreciate that context, Randall. Yeah, because if it's not extremely obvious, is not a process I'm familiar with. So yeah. All right. Well then, shall we? I suppose we've done this in the past, just as like
usually the best way to do it is to just say if anyone has any objections, and that way so anybody can state their objections, because usually these votes are pretty easy to get through. So that's how we've done it in past working groups.
All right, let's do it that way. Thanks, Randall. So yeah, any objections, feel free to let them be heard in the chat or raise a hand if you'd like to say it out loud.
Yeah, I'm sorry, a succinct statement as to what we're raising objections to or not. Just to restate that, we can put that in the notes as well, maybe.
Yeah. So the motion is to quote unquote sponsor this project, and what that would mean is basically that I would go to the TAC and I would say, hey, the Securing Software Repos Working Group would like to sponsor a project for adoption by the OpenSSF, this project specifically, this repository, yeah, if it passes and the TAC is on board, it'll move over to the OpenSSF's repositories on GitHub and be subject then to all of those processes, and consequently, yeah, governed by a neutral foundation rather than being just a VMware project. It does not bind anybody to use it, right? It doesn't bind anyone even to maintain it, though we would like to think that it implies that we're going to have maintainers for it, and the VMware folks have made it clear that they're not planning on running away. Jason, was that clear?
Yeah, I think so.
The only thing I would add very quickly is, oh, sorry. I don't know who I cut off from that time. I would also add it means that we would be expected to keep an eye on that project as a group. So we would be asking our staff to present to us periodically or to report to us what's happening.
I was going to say just that, Jock.
Yeah,
but having some goals in mind is not bad, because I know that that's something they've asked for us at SKF, which is a substantially larger project. But having maybe like, this is how we plan or what we intend to do, this might be a way of tracking it. And as Jock said, reporting on that periodically might be also good, because that's one of the things that has come up is how do you gauge success in your project? And also going on with what Zach said, yeah, like you could even fork projects out of Linux Foundation should that be a issue, which is kind of our risk, which is what they told us. So the project being an open SSF doesn't encapsulate it in any way, shape, or form.
So just to, I like completely agree with those points. The project does have a pretty decent roadmap for at least kind of probably the next 9 months. And I'd be more than happy to kind of nominate myself and or Cairo to come back to this meeting on a regular basis and keep folks apprised.
I think, Zach, that otherwise you should have general consensus, it sounds like.
All right. Sounds great. Then thanks, everyone. I will take as an action item then follow up on our stuff. I'm going to go present that to the TAC. Yes. And then we'll see how that goes. But yeah, bearing in mind what Randall said about might be a while till we hear officially.
A person you can talk to is Krobe. Krobe is very good at guiding people through this. He guided us, so he's a great resource and very helpful. So if you maybe want to hit him up on Slack and ask him that you want to present something to the TAC, he can give you more minute details on what you need. You might want to grab that presentation from Jacob because you might need that. So just saying.
Okay. Excellent. Yes, and I may bother you on Slack as well, if that's okay. Yes, thank you. Cool. All right, excellent. Yeah, so I see in the chat there's a good question that I think is we'll do at the end if we have time, about the relationship between TUF and Intoda. I think it actually is particularly of interest if you are a reproducible builds type of person. And so we can kind of get into that. But first, let's move on with the rest of the agenda. Joshua, again, tell us about Salsa 1.0.
All right, I'll try to take less time this time. Yeah, okay. Let me share another. It's much nicer to look at slides than me. So I hope most people have heard of Salsa, but Salsa is an OpenSSF project, the supply chain levels for software artifacts. It's another kind of specification designed to provide like tamper protection for artifact build flows. It's a cross-industry collaboration based on work originally done at Google, and it's kind of targeting build system and package ecosystem developers, which is, you know, wave emoji, why I'm here, hello. We've had a Salsa 0.1 version published on salsa.dev for quite a long time now, and we're really pushing for a draft of the next release, which is going to be our 1.0 kind of stable release. We're aiming to get that into draft and push it through an active review period by the end of this month. That's one of the reasons I'm here. And I thought I could just kind of give a brief overview of the things that are changing, just in case folks are familiar with Salsa in its current incarnation. But maybe before I do that, I should ask if folks are, like, if the audience is predominantly not familiar with it, maybe this is the wrong position to, you know, the wrong slide to speak to for 5 minutes. So are folks generally familiar with that in this group?
Personally, I would for sure appreciate a quick introduction, but just like a high-level overview at least.
Yeah. Okay. yeah, I'm prepared the wrong content, I think. I over assumed, my apologies. Let's see if I've got anything that you can look at that's useful. Okay, I've got an old thing we can look at. Okay, so this is like a diagram of a kind of fairly typical software supply chain. And developer submits some source code to a revision control repository, some build system kind of pulls in a bunch of dependencies and builds that source code into some kind of package. It gets distributed to some kind of end user. And so as these red arrows indicate, there's lots of places where things can go wrong in this this kind of process. And so the Salsa specification is an attempt to define some best practices to secure that process from tampering. And it aims to do so in kind of an incrementally achievable way by providing this notion of leveling. And it wants that to be able to be automatically verified so that you know, whatever trust assertions are being made can be kind of checked prior to using the software, and you can proceed if you're comfortable. Yeah, I think that's kind of like the very high level TLDR. And it's a set of like recommendations for build systems in the kind of CI/CD pipeline sense, right? Rather than build system in, not in the kind of make or basal level of build system. It's unfortunately abstract term that's used in multiple ways, but yeah, it's focused on the orchestration software that produces the output artifacts that might end up on an end user system.
Just a question. The target, you mentioned build systems, but the original graph pointed to the whole development, building, and distribution process. So are you targeting who with this?
The target audience is people who develop systems which orchestrate and build software. So like, for example, you know, tectons or internal platform teams or GitHub Actions kind of systems, that kind of, yeah, that's that kind of, I don't have a good term to use instead, I'm afraid, but that's what we generally mean when we refer to build system in the Salsa project.
Okay. Okay, I think you can continue with whatever you want to present today.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm mostly here to let folks know that we're pushing for this release, and we'd welcome some feedback once we get to that review period from audiences like this, so I can come back and maybe even share a more comprehensive, slightly longer overview of what the project is and what its current status is when we get close to that. But yeah, I mostly injected this into the agenda as an FYI, as I was already attending to talk about our stuff. But given that I over-assumed how much context there was in the audience, I think better if I just leave it at that.
Yeah, that sounds great. We'd love to have you back, go into a little bit more detail, especially if you can come with material on kind of what Matteo's pulling on, right? Like there are a number of potential kinds of audiences for Salsa. And if you want to focus on this package repository audience, and I believe there's been a little bit of writing, if I'm remembering correctly, from Brandon Lum, who may or may not be on the call today, on Salsa for package repositories. That could be good to link in. And then Joshua, do you see the quick question? Yep, quick question on the timeline. All right. we'll go ahead and move on just to make sure we don't miss anything here. And on the agenda, and then we can come back to any of these in time at the end. Follow up from, all right, I volunteered Brandon, but I don't think he's on the call. A while ago, there was a survey that went out to folks running, again, mostly language ecosystem package managers on a large number of things. So that includes multi-factor authentication, that includes cryptographic signing of packages, that includes all manner of security measures. And so that's gone out. We have responses. The responses contain possibly some information we don't necessarily want to publish. Namely, it's a list of various weak points on various repositories, which we will hopefully in time address, but don't want to hand to someone who's looking for opportunities at the moment. So we're going to keep the data under light lock and key. If you can explain yourself as someone with a connection to the ecosystem, I think they will give you access, but we're not publishing it. So the follow-up there is to sort of say, hey, can we turn that into a public-facing report, identify some trends, identify areas for investment, again, not in a way that's gonna put a target on anyone's back. The response I got from Brandon recently was basically, we're pretty close to that point. There are a couple ecosystems that wanted to amend some of that data they had given us. So we're waiting on that before we roll out a public report, but that public report is in progress. I welcome a question, but I will note that this is all me reporting for someone else.
I don't think I ever got, I sent that Slack message a few, like 2 weeks ago and never got a response from anybody about being able to get insights into some of that data.
You may want to bump it in the new year. I think the last couple of weeks have been hard to get a response from anybody on anything in my experience.
You mean to say that people haven't been paying attention to Slack over the holidays? Man, what slackers. No, okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah, and then feel free to bring it up if you haven't gotten a response by the next meeting. But I think that's probably what happened there. Cool. Next item on the agenda is another follow-up. This one is me, and I will say I totally dropped the ball on it again for related reasons to what we were just talking about. Not really being at work for a lot of the last couple of weeks. We talked about the OpenSSF as sort of a data repository host or clearinghouse for information about package repositories. We've noted that there's a number of groups in the OpenSSF, along with folks outside, especially academic researchers, who have been interested in data around, how many packages are getting yanked and why. And actually, if I can ask if someone knows the tweet that Dustin dropped a little while ago on some of the takedown data for PyPI, dropping that in the chat or the notes doc would be awesome, because that was pretty interesting. But this is stuff that's not widely available that we kind of have to lean on package repository administrators for at the moment. And so it would be really cool and useful as a community of people seeking to understand risks here, much like we're collecting data qualitatively on the package repository ecosystem with that survey. I think quantitative data would be extremely useful as well. So I was supposed to and did not, and I will hopefully address that post-haste. Prepare basically a summary of what's that going to look like. What data are we interested in? So we've talked about things like domain squatting risk information, right? There's this worry about I sign up for an account with an email address at a custom domain, and then I let that domain lapse. Someone else realizes that they can register that domain, start getting my email, and then they can log in and publish a package as me. Like, to what extent is that a problem? There were things about, again, takedown rates, what fraction of packages are malicious. Are we taking down mostly spam packages? Are we taking down mostly malware? Information about downloads, information about typo squatting in names of packages, all that could be useful. We see a lot of academic research where it's so much work to collect this information from one package ecosystem that they say, okay, we're going to do a deep dive on, IPI or NPM for this paper. And those cross ecosystem comparisons would be extremely valuable. And so I think facilitating that by kind of collecting this data in standard formats would be super awesome. So I have to write down what I just ranted at you about in a document and then come back. Okay, great. Couple of things that are worth bringing up too. I've seen some chatter on in the kind of Rust Carver Crates ecosystem and in the Zig ecosystems about sort of building package manager security features. In some cases, this is outsiders making a proposal. In other cases, it is folks inside the ecosystem making a proposal for a package manager, but not thinking too hard about signing. But I think there are a number of opportunities to influence here. And I just wanted to drop links and then note this and then see whether there's anything we can do as a group to support, if we should be looking at pulling together a guide or, again, loose recommendations or something. Randall?
Something that I've been bringing up because I'm an old Linux community member involved with the distros and like homebrew and things like that. Lately, there's been a big misconception. Like, I think that if we, being the securing software repos group, put a guide, because basically what has been brought to my attention is that what we do in the Linux community is more of like an end user thing. So the end goals are different from, say, PyPI or Ruby Gems or anybody like that. And there is talk from some very important Linux members about how Linux Foundation and OpenSSF is completely tone deaf to what really happens. And I don't necessarily agree with that standpoint. I just think that we attack different things, and unfortunately, two things share a name. And I think maybe that should be rectified, because now there's also a new group pushing the next gen packaging formats, which is Flatpak and Snap. And that's just going to add more confusion to the whole thing.
So if I'm hearing you, Randall, you're saying that while in theory this group is supposed to be welcoming, again, both kind of curated, centralized package repositories like traditional Linux distro repositories, and kind of more community focused ones, that there's some conflation there, or is this
correct? Like, let me give you a very good example, like homebrew. Most homebrew users expect homebrew to be safe. In other words, they expect us to only distribute like safe packages. And that's the thing. It's not about Salsa. It's not about Guac. It's not about Fresca. They really don't care about any of that. They don't care about SBOMs. They really just care about, like, hey, I installed it. You had it. I installed it. It's here. If it wasn't secure, then why are you carrying unsecure software, you nitty-wits? Like, so there's definitely, like, I would argue a difference there of opinion and I think approach that needs to happen, because at Gen 2, it's the same thing. I've heard from the Debian maintainers, it's the same thing. And that's why they change packages around. But it's just a different point of view, I think. Those groups then say software like package managers that are aiming to target developers as opposed to end users. There is a difference.
I see a hand from Jacques.
I agree. I guess I would have two notes though, like two buts. The first one would be, if we're tone deaf, it's not because we're tone deaf, it's more that we just haven't heard from folks. So it's really good that you're here, Randall, to help us see that. And the other one would be like a matter of scale. I got into what's the technical term? A pissing match with Drew DeVault on Hacker News one time about this topic. He's of the view that it should all be curated everywhere. And I understand the logic for that. NPM has 2 million packages PyPI has 400,000, RubyGems has 180,000. Those are between an order of magnitude to 2 orders of magnitude more than any distribution distributes. Debian has 1,000 volunteers. RubyGems has 4 maintainers. Who's going to do it?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, if you keep going down that line, I mean, Homebrew only has about 60 some odd people. In Gen 2, let's just not talk about Gen 2.
Sure. And that's the difficulty, right, of like a curated approach, is that it somewhat limits. And there's also the advantage that a lot of cases, various distributions can sort of kind of quasi rely on each other to keep an eye on the hen house. So there's some shared load there, but that's just not true of the package ecosystems. Like every package, like what works for PyPI, what PyPI monitors does not help RubyGems, and vice versa. Right? Like we can share general trends, but we can't be like, oh, package X is bad. Right?
And another
Because
thing that came up in the
silo
cert,
thing.
another thing that came up in the cert that's interesting, Jock, is that I've been told by several software developers, like the curl people, that it would be really helpful if distros stopped trying to fix things on their own in their own isolated environment, and then they end up with 60 patches that no one knows where they came from. So, but in my opinion, though, it's because of the fact of what is the expectation of the person using it, that you install it and it automatically just works like magic, or that you're going to set something up or you got to read something. I think there's just different users. And I think the unfortunate truth is just that it's all called packaging, and yeah.
Yeah. I think I would be interested in, I don't have any connections in that world. I'd be interested in seeing more folks. Like, it's great that you're here, Randall, but so far it's only you.
I can bring Homebrew and I can bring Gen 2 as well.
Yeah. So just to sort of get that conversation going and make sure that we aren't missing, like that we aren't sort of like maneuvering the universe into a place where we're going to wind up with like 2 houses alike in dignity, but not really getting along.
Agreed. I could definitely bring those people around for you guys. Some of them are a little bit more difficult than others, but I'm sure I could bring with time a lot of people around. But I just think it would be good to have guidance. So therefore there isn't, because sometimes there's this thing like we, as when I say we guys, isn't OpenSSF is championing Salsa and Fresca and Guac, and that's just not something we could really do from like an end user packaging perspective.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like it. Oh, sorry. Okay. It's an important point. It sounds like we could do with some clarification on this intro. I like Chang's suggestion for someone to submit a talk on this to Packaging Con. Sorry, I see a hand from Jacob. Didn't mean to ignore you.
No, I just put it up. Sorry about that. The topic of this item is Greenfield opportunities. And so for context, I'm one of the Cargo contributors who received the drive-by contribution of Just Use Salsa, which has sparked a really interesting conversation. And I'm perhaps, I'm here. I'm perhaps one of the most receptive audiences you could get. And even so, there is something different about it in a Greenfield than there is in other ecosystems, in that all the explanations they linked to were about how Salsa is better than your current signing solution. We don't have a signing solution. So the argument needs to be rewritten as, here's why it's better than doing nothing, which is in some ways much easier and in some ways much harder, but it's definitely a different argument. So the bigger feedback to expand that is, if you're coming to a Greenfield, or if you're an expert trying to save someone who came to a Greenfield, please try and be aware of the context there, because it may not be the same as your general advice for why this project's a good idea.
Yeah, and that's on me for labeling the agenda item a little bit poorly. My point in bringing this up was not saying that necessarily we want to be making these drive-by suggestions, but rather that there is a lot we in this group have had a lot of discussion on the, pros and cons of various approaches to package signing and so on. And there aren't I'm seeing these conversations and there aren't resources that we can point to that say, hey, here's a quick primer on pros and cons of various approaches. So we have to keep, what I see is we keep having these same conversations again and again. And my point in bringing it up in this group is, it seems like perhaps one useful coordinating function of this working group could be to cut some of that off, right? And to sort of say, rather than having this argument in every ecosystem, can we provide recommendations, which you're free to ignore or you're free to decide you like and follow, but can we provide common guidance and best practices here? So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Jacob.
I guess I didn't make myself clear because I think I'm largely agreeing with you. Us as a group cannot stop those drive-by contributors. What we can do is, seeing that they're happening, write good documentation that is aimed at Greenfield projects, at people who are just jumping in, at people who don't necessarily have the baggage that Salsa was intended to fix. And then when those drive-by contributors make their contribution, they can point to our documents and say, here's why you should do it as a Greenfield project.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Then yeah, sounds like we're totally on the same page. And I will also just commend you by proxy. The conversation in the Rust community has been consistently extremely good and nuanced on this point. And this is a strength and also arguably a weakness of the Rust community, is you guys and gals want to get things right. And so I've really enjoyed a lot of that conversation. I think there are people thinking really hard about all these problems. And so we will likely create that. So given that we only have a couple minutes left, I don't know if we want to conclude anything here. If someone were to if I had more hours in a day, I would volunteer to try to coordinate writing some guide and some materials for the setting. In lieu of that, perhaps we just collectively decide that this is a vague goal of this group. But if anyone has the time at this point to drive it, that would be awesome. But I'm also happy just saying this is something we vaguely intend to do.
What do you do with ideas that you vaguely intend to do? Do you like use your issue tracker, or do you just let them disappear at the bottom of a Google Doc?
That's a great idea. This is a 60-page notes doc at this point, so we probably should have a better system for that. I can take that as an action item, as sort of like solicit some discussion in the Slack about what do we do with ideas that we want to do but aren't going to yet. So I can give that to myself, and then as a follow-up from that, tracking this would be.
I mean, can you just put this in the issue tracker until you decide not to use that? I don't know why you wouldn't use the issue tracker. The project has a GitHub repository with an associated issue tracker.
That is a great point. All right. I will, yeah, I just haven't looked at that issue tracker ever. So it's
empty.
Cool. All right, 2 minutes left. I have, there's a great question earlier that I want to address because I think I can do it without causing more confusion in 2 minutes, though don't hold me to that. The relationship between TUF and in toto. So dramatically oversimplifying, I think of TUF as a system for, I'm a package repository. This is how we decide who's in charge of any individual package. So I would say something like Joshua is the person I trust for the Salsa package. And then you would be able to, and that would maybe embed, public key information. Then you as a client would be able to download the package, see a signature on that package from that key. Zooming out, you can think of Joshua is the person who's allowed to sign this package as just a policy for determining whether a package is good or not. You might be interested in much more complex policies, like maybe your package is good only if Joshua signed the source, and then some trusted CI/CD system built the source. Or in the case of reproducible builds, multiple CI/CD systems built it and got the exact same output. And specifying a policy like that is the domain of in toto. And so an ideal system for doing this would have something like tough, basically delegating to, for each individual package, an in toto layout, which specifies the policy. So you would hang the in toto policies off of tough, and tough would be the mechanism by which you securely distribute them. And then there's also other important roles that tough plays in distributing the attestation, or like tracking the material that proves that a policy is complied with. So hopefully that didn't raise more questions than it answered, but that's roughly how we think about it. So thanks for indulging me. And if you want to hop in the Slack, would be happy to have that discussion in more detail and omit fewer of the details that I omitted to make it technically somewhat wrong. All right, well, thanks for coming, everybody. It's fun as always. We'll see you in 4 weeks at this time, or 2 weeks if the time zone for the APAC meeting isn't impossible for you, and otherwise in Slack and on the emails. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.